Releases kind of ended up slowing down. There was a bunch of conflicts about like what's going to get in and what's not.
What I had heard from at least people's impression, was that Joyent had built this whole cloud using Node.js, which is extremely impressive for the time at which they did it. But upgrading certain things like V8 or making changes to certain interfaces that perhaps were necessary for the growth of the platform or the needs of the community potentially broke like this giant cloud that they had built. So there was this huge conflict where like for them to be good stewards of the platform for themselves was in conflict with Joyent being stewards for the broader community. So my understanding is they stopped accepting community contributions. They weren't open to things like updating V8. Node was starting to show its age. It didn't have the language features that people wanted to use.
Node.js is a great thing, and I would bet the company on it, but I would not bet the company on Joyent. I see Joyent doing some stuff which is amateurish, maybe a little childish. So I would fork it, and I would then give that back to the community.
I had taken a break from core for a while and was doing more community stuff. I started to hear from people that there was going to be a fork, and I was like, oh, okay. I probably know who would be doing that. Maybe I should just reach out to all the people that like might do that. And what I figured out was that like there wasn't going to be a fork. There was going to be 3 forks. Because not only were people kind of like upset with Joyent, they were also not really talking to each other. Like a lot of relationships had just broken apart. And what I decided to do at that time was just, you know, at least make it 1 fork.
You had a project that didn't start as corporately stewarded. It started as open source with a BDFL. It got purchased. It got turned into a corporately stewarded project, but that was ambiguous. And slowly over time, it drifted into the point where the corporation was driving the roadmap, but that was not aligned with the expectations of the community. So community was like, okay, well, like, fuck you, right? Like, we're gonna like go do our thing.
I run NodeConf, and we use that as an opportunity, since so many people are going to be in the Bay Area, to have a get-together after that conference. And this is, you know, a collection of a bunch of contributors that are upset, some of their employers, some of the startups that have literally built their entire business around Node. It's not a group of people that get along with each other necessarily.
Because what happens with the BDFL model is that you have all these people that have been putting years into this project, and they have to fight with one person to get all their stuff in. And eventually they start fighting with each other too.
We were all now in a group together, like solving this problem that we had with Joyent. When we walk away from that meeting, we have 3 weeks, we set a timer, and we say that we're gonna have 3 weeks, and all the contributors are gonna figure out what we kind of want to see, and you can just tell us if you're willing to do that or not, and we can like have a conversation, move on from there. But like let's set a date that we'll do something. So we create this private repository called Node Forward.
Basically, every core committer on the project or core contributor to the project joined this Node Forward group, but TJ refused, abstained from it, or was prohibited by Joyent, I don't know, but he didn't join. The idea there was just to kind of like have some discussions, right? Because we came to Joyent, we said Node needs open governance. And they said, what does that mean? And we said, good question. We'll get right back. We'll get back to you on that. Let's go figure that out.
We put together this offer that, in hindsight, is a dream for Joyent. We would just operate the project under this governance model. And if Joyent ever decided, they could just pull it away, and we would have to, you know, go home, right? Like we'd have to just go and create something else or call it something else at that point. And they just didn't engage. They didn't participate at all. And when the 3-week mark came up, they removed 2 contributors without talking to anybody. And then they put on a blog post. So we were like, oh, okay. So they told us to go fuck ourselves. We're gonna go. That week though, they get a new CEO. And so everyone around this is like preparing for us to just go off and fork. But now all of the companies and all of the corporate representation is like, let us try to negotiate with this new guy. And this new guy turns out to be like a totally reasonable guy. Like we really think that we can negotiate with him. And they're not wrong. Scott Hammond's a totally reasonable guy.
I knew that there was some angst in the community. The team at Joyent we talked about that before I came in, and I knew that Node was an important project to Joyent, and I knew that Node was a very important project in the whole to the much broader developer community. So I spent a lot of time when I first got to Joyent meeting with a lot of the key stakeholders in the project.
He reached out to me and like set up a time for us to like chat and kind of get to know each other. He was just kind of like learning the space.
We set up I forget what we called it, a leadership council or a community council or something, where I wanted to bring in some of the key stakeholders from each of the different facets to really vet the issues and come to a consensus on what Node should be going forward.
So they created an advisory board, the Joyent Node Advisory Board. And they were like, we're doing this to listen to the community. And then we told them a lot of things that they didn't do. And we're like, you're not listening to us. And I'm like, oh, we're definitely listening.
We were working on new features, but like this release just wasn't being made.
It's dragging on. And we keep arriving back at the same things. And the contributors now, they have a governance policy that they like. They're in a private repository where we now have more people contributing to it than the project has ever had consistently already in private.
Essentially what I tried to do is just codify a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in terms of governance and a contribution policy and scope it just to this kind of Node forward repo.
The core devs who had been working on this, right? They were like, oh, cool. Like this is a place where I can actually go and send a bug fix and it will get landed. It's not going to end up in a Node release yet, but like at least I can just get it off my to-do list. Whereas all these patches I keep sending to Joyent Node, like they're just sitting there pending forever and they're not happening. So there was a lot of frustration around that.
TJ's not working on this project, but the main code going into even the Node.js project is Fedor and Trevor porting stuff out of this private repository into the public project. So everybody's just getting annoyed with this situation. And we just go, let's make it public, but let's not like do a big thing about it. Let's not rub it in their face. Like we want to just like stop with the annoyance of it being private. That leads to like, me getting phone calls that are, insinuating that I'm going to be sued for trademark infringement.
It was something that was called Node, that was clearly competing with Node, and it was in the same space, in the same market category as Node, and so therefore it's a copyright violation, and they would sue over it. And we're like, there are tens of thousands of forks of Node that are all called Node, and they're all in the same space as Node, and they're all different from Node. This is how GitHub works. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And they're like, cool story, we're gonna sue.
Funny thing about trademark law is if you don't enforce your trademark rights, then you actually don't get to enforce your trademark rights. And I told them that we had full intent to pursue our trademark rights around Node and Node.js.
We don't really want to like cause a bunch of drama or a big scene about it. What we really want to do is just prove out that like this contribution model where the contributors have more control over the project works.
I understood why they wanted to do it. In the end, I disagreed with what they were doing. I was concerned that we were going to lose the big users. The feedback that I was getting from that community was that this is a disaster, that if Node Forward goes ahead as a separate group, they would have to rethink whether they were willing to make a bet and a commitment on Node as a platform on a going forward basis for them. So they wanted a healthy singular community. They didn't want this fractured community. So I was very concerned from that, and that these were also the organizations that we're going to depend on for providing additional technical contributions and financial contributions.
I flipped it back to private. I'm like, you guys are great, I love you, call me when you want to fork. And so Fyodor replied, okay, I forked it. I called it io.js, it's right here, let's do it.
We were at some family's house and just had this like, big Thanksgiving dinner. And I start getting pinged by like reporters, and everybody's like, what are you doing? Like, oh my God, like, how could you do this? Like, this is such an underhanded move to do this over a holiday weekend. And I was just like, I have literally no idea what you're talking about. So, and the reporters were pinging me like, would you like to comment on io.js? And I was like, io.js who? I've never heard of this thing. And then I go back and I look at the mailing lists. I look at the like comments that Fedora had posted on GitHub. And he was just like, Wednesday, he was just like, hey, what do y'all think of io.js? You would just like rename and then open source it again. And somebody else was like, yeah, I don't know, I think that'd be fine. And then like 6 hours go by and nobody's responded. And he was like, okay, well, cool, I'm doing it. And then he did. Thursday, Thanksgiving morning, everybody in the US wakes up and sees that there's this new io.js thing that's a fork of Node.
I knew that there was some angst in the community.
It's dragging on and on. It's dragging on and on. Let's not rub it in their face.
Like such an underhanded move to